Yes, yes, yes. Now, another set of ideas center around the terms introversion and extraversion.
It's simply practical, because there are certain people who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions. While there are other people who are more influenced by the subjective factor. Now you see, the subjective factor, that's very characteristic, was understood by Freud as a sort of pathological autoerotism.
Yes, yes.
Now this is a mistake. You know, we have, the psyche has two conditions, two important conditions. The one is the environmental influence,
yes, yes.
And the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is born. The psyche is by no means tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes,
yeah.
And they are there from the very first moment of our life. And they give a definite character, even to the little child. And that is a subjective factor, looked at from the outside. Now, if you look at it from the inside,
yes,
then it is just so as if you would observe the world.
Yes.
When you observe the world, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images.
Yes.
A world of images.
Yes.
Generally known as fantasies.
Fantasies.
Yet these fantasies are facts. You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life.
Yes.
Or a bridge is built.
Yes.
These houses were all fantasies.
Yes.
Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, say, a form of energy.
Yes.
Despite the fact we can't measure it.
Yes.
It is a manifestation of something.
Yes.
And that is a reality. That is just a reality as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles or something like that.
Yes.
It is no more. You can't show it.
Yes.
But it has been a fact.
Yes. Yes.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world.
Yes.
Of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Yes. Yes.
And so it is simply the world from within, seen from within.
Yes.
It is just as if we were seeing into another aspect of matter. And so, you see, the man who is going by the external world, by the influences of the external world, say society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that he is more valid, you know, because this is valid, this is real. And the man who goes by the subjective factor is not valid because subjective factor is nothing. Yeah. No, that man is just as well based because he is bases himself upon the world from within. Yeah. And so he is quite right, even if he says, oh, there is nothing but my fantasy, you know. Yeah. And of course that is the introvert. And that the introvert is always afraid of the external world. He will tell you, when you ask him, he will be apologetic about it. Yeah. He will say, of course, yes, I know only my fantasies. And he has always resentment. And as the world in general, particularly America, is extroverted like hell, the introvert has no place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he doesn't know that he beholds the world from within.
Yeah.
And that gives him dignity, and that gives him certainty.
Would you perceive the world being made up of only people or extreme introverts and people that are extreme extroverts?
Well, you know, Bismarck once said, God may protect me against my friends. With my enemies, I can deal myself alone. You know how people are. They catch a word, and then everything is schematized along that word. There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert.
Yeah.
Such a man would be in the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency. For instance, the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all.
Yes.
And you see, there are people who are very well balanced and are just as much influenced from within as they are from without.
Yes.
Just as little.
Yes, yes.
And so with all the finer classifications, you know,
Yes.
they are only sort of point de repère, points for orientation. My whole scheme of typology is merely a sort of orientation. Namely, there is such a factor as introversion, there is such a factor as extraversion. The classification of individuals means nothing at all. This is only the instrumentarium.
Yes.
For the practical psychologists.
Yes.
To explain, for instance, a husband to a wife, or what. For instance, it is very often the case, one could almost say, it is almost the rule, but I don't want to make too many rules, you see, in order not to be schematic,
Yeah.
That an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the counter type to complement himself, for instance.
Well, Dr. Jung, of course, tied in with your typology and quotation version, we, of course, know of your concepts of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition.
Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows you at the same time how I arrived at such a typology. Namely, sensation tells you that there is something. Thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not, to be accepted or not, accepted or rejected.
Yes.
And intuition, now there is a difficulty.
Yes.
You don't know ordinarily how intuition works. So when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly who he got at that hunch, or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. I will tell you a little story. I had two patients. The man was a sensation type, and the woman was an intuitive type. Of course, they felt attraction. And so they took a little boat and went out to the Lake of Zurich. And there were those birds that dive after fish, you know.
Yeah.
And then after a certain time they come up again, and you can't tell where they come up. And so they began to bet who was the first to see the bird. Now, you would think that the one who observes reality very carefully, the sensation type, would of course win out.
Yeah.
Not at all. The woman won the bet completely.
Yeah.
She was beating him on all points.
Yeah.
Because by intuition she knew it before.
I see.
See? Now, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of associations.
Yes.
Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious.
Yes.
That is as near as I can get. This is a very important function, because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen.
Yes.
And there you need your intuition, because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what there is going to happen.
For example, more specifically, what would be an example or a difference between an intuitive extrovert and an intuitive introvert?
Well, you know, you have chosen a somewhat difficult case, you know, because one of the most difficult types is the intuitive introvert.
Yes,
you know.
I have.
The intuitive extrovert you find among hunters, bankers, gamblers.
Yes.
That is quite understandable.
Yes.
But the introvert the introverted variety is more difficult, because he has intuitions as to the subjective factor, namely the inner world.
Yes.
And of course that is now very difficult to understand, because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk of them.
Yes.
If he's not a fool, because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees, because people won't understand it.
Yes.
For instance, once I had a patient, a young woman, about 27 or 8, and her first words were, when I had seated her, she said, "You know, doctor, I come to you because I have a snake in my abdomen." I said, "What?" Yes, a snake, a black snake, coiled up right in the bottom of my abdomen. And I must have made a rather bewildered face at her. And she said, "You know, I don't mean it literally, but I should say it was a snake. It was a snake." You see? Now, you see, our further conversation a little later was that she said, that was about in the middle of our treatment that only lasted for 10 consultations. She had foretold me, "I come 10 times and then it's all right." I said, "How do you know?" "Oh, I got a hunch," she said.
Yeah.
And really, about the 5th or 6th hour, she said, "Doctor, I must tell you, the snake has risen. It is now about here." Hunch. And then on the 10th day, I said, "Now, this is our last hour, and do you feel cured?" And she said, beaming, she said, "You know, this morning it came up and came out of my mouth, and the head was golden." And those were her last words. Now, you see, that same girl, when it comes to reality, she came to me because she couldn't hear the step of her feet anymore.
Yeah.
Because she walked on air.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
She couldn't hear it, and that frightened her. And when she came to me, I asked her for her address. And then she said, "Oh, pension so-and-so." Well, it is not just called pension, but it is a sort of pension. And it is, I never had heard of it.
Yeah.
And I said, "Now, I'm curious, I never have heard of that place." "Well, it's a very nice place," he said. Curious enough, there are only young girls there, very nice and very lively young girls. And they have a merry time. I often wish they would invite me to their merry evenings. And I said, but they amuse themselves all alone. Said, oh no, there are plenty of young gentlemen coming in, and they have a beautiful time, but they never invite me. It turned out that it was a private brother.
Yes.
And she was a perfectly decent girl, you know, of a very good family, not from here. She had found that place, I don't know how. And she was utterly unaware that those were all prostitutes. I said, for heaven's sake, you fell into a very dark place. You hastened to get out of it. You see, that was her sensation.
Yeah.
She didn't see reality.
Yeah.
But she had hunches like anything, and they came off.
Yeah.
Now, you see, such a person cannot possibly speak of her experiences.
Yes.
Because everybody would think she's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
I myself was quite shocked when I thought, for heaven's sake, is that case a schizophrenia?
Yes. Yes.
Because you don't hear that kind of speech.
Right.
But she assumed that the old man, of course, knows everything, and he even understands such kind of language.
Yeah.
So you see, if when the intuitive, the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, then practically nobody would understand it. He would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep things to themselves. And you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is the great disadvantage. But it is an enormous advantage in another way. Not to speak of the experience they gather in that respect, but also in human relations. For instance, they come into the presence of somebody they don't know. And certainly they have inner images. And those inner images give them a more or less complete information about the psychology of the partner.
Yes. Yes.
You know, that is, but the case can also happen that they come into the presence of somebody who they don't know at all, not from Adam, and they know an important piece out of the biography of that person.
Yes. Yes.
And are not aware of it, and tell the story.
Yes.
And then the fat is in the fire.
Yes, that's right.
You see, so the introverted intuitive has in a way a very difficult life, although one of the most interesting lives.
Yes.
But it is difficult often to get into their cases. Well, I told you that case of that intuitive girl, who suddenly came out with the statement that she had a black snake in the bed.
Yes.
Well, now. That is a collective symbol.
Yes.
That is not an individual fantasy. That is a collective fantasy.
A collective, yes.
That is well known in India.
Yes.
Well, she has nothing to do with India, but we have it too. It was generally human.
Yes.
But it's entirely unknown. So that I even in the first moment thought perhaps she's crazy.
Yes.
But she was only highly intuitive.
Yes.
It is in India known. It is the basis of a whole philosophical system of Tantrism.
Yes.
This is Kundalini. The Kundalini serpent.
I see.
You see? And that is something known to some few specialists.
Yes.
Generally, it's not known that we have a serpent in the abdomen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is a collective, you see, that is a collective dream
or
a collective fantasy.